beautiful weather outside. We're very lucky. For those that are online, you're missing on the sunshine outside. So Jose would have shown you the title. We're going to be talking today about Q methodology and how we integrated it in our project. And it's good to have various members of the project here present. Our project, which is called Advancing Agency in Language Education. So we're going to first give you a bit of a high-level scope of the project itself, and then we're going to focus on the methodology. One of the methodologies, I'll say, Q methodology, which is, I imagine, one of the reasons that you're here, you're interested, and you're wanting to know more about it. And then we're going to wrap up with some takeaways and implications. So starting with the project, I want to go back a little bit here to the Link Dire project, which I know some of you have been following, which is really great work that they did. And one of the things that they found was this gap in teachers' agency. So they're aware of various approaches, plurilingualism, action-oriented approach, technology, but when it comes to the actual implementation, there's that gap in agency on the teachers' end. And this is how this project was conceptualized. It's trying to advance teachers' agency. So in essence, how could we get them to leverage AOA, plurilingualism, and tech in their different approaches? Now here we're also interested in teachers' beliefs and practices, because for you to address something as complex as agency, it's very important that you look at the teachers' beliefs and practices, because that's a solid starting point that can then give you some solutions down the line. And now in knowing the beliefs, how can we develop practical strategies that we can actually help to advance that agency? And this is where this notion of the toolkit will come about, and I'm sure that you'll mention that down the line. Okay, so Q methodology. So the project as a whole takes a mixed methods or iterative design-based research methodology situated in teachers' lived experiences. So again, their beliefs and practices. And there are multiple phases of this project. It's quite a lengthy, short project. And today we're going to only focus on the first phase, which is investigating teacher beliefs and practices. And that's where the Q methodology comes into play, because it really allowed us to look at the nuanced differences of teachers' beliefs at opposite ends to try to really carve out what is it about these three approaches that they're either having challenges with or what is more practical in terms of implementation. So we did that in phase one. Phase two, as you can imagine, would be now once we have the beliefs, then we're going to be looking at the resources, the strategies, and then we're going to work with teachers to develop the toolkit. So these are the later stages. When it comes to the dimensions, so these are the three that we have that are really core to the project. And who we worked with, they were teachers across different educational levels of English, French, and German. So at this stage, we only worked with those three languages, but down the line later for some of the other components, we also added Spanish as a fourth language. But the data that I'm going to present is really based on just those three. So Q methodology. So here you have a definition from the literature. So we're referencing Lobianco and Landberg. And Q methodology, essentially, it helps us to define the nature and complexity of participants' beliefs and practices in a systematic way. Now, this is different than Likert scales, and I imagine that a lot of you here would be familiar with Likert scales. It's different in that now the teachers' beliefs about this core issue that you give them is being compared systematically across the same set of statements that you give. And that's really what allows them then to express their views in a way that doesn't have that dichotomy. And we're able to carve out those small nuanced differences from one belief on a particular item versus another. So to do that, the Q methodology, you have to have different statements that the participants are going to be sorting. And this is where you have to develop those statements for them to then sort in what we call a Q sort. To make the statements, this is where we had different experts on different dimensions come up with a set of statements that then we piloted, we refined. So then in the end, we had a total of 30 statements per dimension, so 90 in total. And the participants then had to sort those into what we call Q grids for us to then look at similarities and patterns to then carve out those factors that are differentiating, for us to then understand their beliefs about these contentious topics. So in doing all of this, we were able to gather 47 Q surveys that were completed. And then what we wanted to do was invite some of those that completed the Q surveys to then be able to participate in focus groups. And the rationale behind that is really to allow them to express themselves and to say why they sorted in a particular way that they did, which is important because as you'll see later in the grid, one of the issues that you have here, they're given a grid like this and they have to sort everything. And sometimes they feel that sense of frustration. They're not able to maybe put things where they want, but they can't really say that verbally as they're completing this. So that's why we wanted to have that focus group afterwards for them to be able to share their opinions. And this is the software that we use, the Q-Sort Touch. So first they do a pre-sort. So if a statement is challenging, neither challenging nor feasible, they have to put it in the right bins. And once they do that, then they have to sort it so that they can come up with something that's complete that would go in a grid like this. And this example is one of the statements that we use for technology. So for technology used to be effective, teaching should be organized in such a way that the roles of teachers and learners are flexible. So where does that go? Is it feasible? Is it challenging? Unsure? So they have to put that somewhere there. And now we will pass it to Jose.
Thank you, Karam. With the responses that we received from the surveys, we conducted a factor analysis for each one of the dimensions: action-oriented, plurilingualism, and technology. And to use it, we basically follow the steps we have on the left side menu until we complete the factor analysis. This is two examples of the output information for the factor analysis we conducted for the technology dimension. On the left, we had the composite grid for factor 1. And this composite grid is the combined answers for all the significant participants for this factor. And the example on the right is the distinguishing statements for the factor. So these are the statements that make the factor more unique in comparison to the others. The way we design a systematic way to approach the interpretation of the factors. So for each dimension, once we complete the factor analysis, we'll start with factor 1. And then we look at the composite grid that I showed before, at those statements that have been categorized as most challenging and most feasible, the ones on the extremes. And we do that to draft an initial story for the factor. We label the factor and provide a description with the information we have from the statements. And because we don't want to overlook the whole grid, we also take a look at the distinguishing statements in the whole grid to see if they're telling us something else, if we need to refine the story. We repeat that for each factor 1, 2, 3, 5. And when we have them already, we cross-check the statements across the factors to find repeated, most feasible, and most challenging statements to see if there are some commonalities among the factors. With all that, we have a story of factors. And each factor has a story, and at the same time is part of the story for the dimension. Here we have, well, a summary of that work we conducted. We had the three dimensions, we had the factors, the labels, and also the participants, the significant participants for that factor. For instance, for action-oriented approach, we have things such as shifting power, activating a student's agency, real life versus generic tasks. For plurilingualism, these stories are named as tension, so belief versus practice tension. Factor 4, native speakerism versus plurilingual competent tension. And for the technology dimension, I will point out factor 1 with 13 participants. The main thing was ensuring authentic, secure research for practicing using technology. We like to finish the presentation highlighting some takeaways and research implications. While key methodology can be a mixed methods approach, we had the quantitative component for the factor analysis and the qualitative side with the stories of factors and also the focus groups. Allows participants to provide the insights in an accessible way. They don't need to produce any kind of written or spoken response. And the way the sorting works, let us know a little more than about their subjectivities, their insights than Likert scale will tell us. But it can result in some participant resistance because it's kind of new for the participants. That takes a little bit of time to get used to it. And it's also a little bit more challenging, require more effort, make them think more deeply. And that's also something came out with in the focus groups and the conversations we have with the participants. Things to consider is how we design the Q grid. Our grid has 5 bins to sort 30 statements. In Q methodology literature, you will find Q grids with 7, 9, and even 11 bins. But we consider that our participants were not going to complete only one survey, but 3 surveys. So having a bigger grid and more statements could be perhaps too challenging for them, too tiring. And another important aspect is how we name the bins. We name the bins from most feasible to most challenging. Normally, it's not done in that way. We find agree, disagree, most useful, less useful. And that's because the nature of our research, because we want to know what the participants are able to implement in their teaching context. And not necessarily, we want to know what is feasible or not, and not necessarily what they agree with or disagree. The modality of the surveys, we administer the surveys online. And that's something that is convenient, is easy, but at the same time, it didn't let us know how the participants were sorting the cards. It will be in person, we'll be able to see how they were sorting the cards in the Q grid. So that was something that was interesting. QSortat, well, it was a tool that the license it was not too high, then the interface is easy to use. So it was a good solution for us to use QSortat for the surface. And the only thing is that it doesn't support that analysis, and that's why Kate came into place. Kate is free, data compatible with QSortat, and the learning curve is not so high. It's kind of easy to use, kind of user-friendly, in my opinion. And with that, we finish our presentation. Well, thank you so much for your attention.